going to talk about that today, the story that God is writing, his providence in all things from 1 Samuel. But we need to do just a quick review. We've been studying this book for a long time. It's pretty thick, lots of things going on. But we've come to a point in the story where Israel, having conquered and settled in the land, has come to a stage where they want to switch the way that they're governed. Up until this point in Israel's history, Samuel has kind of ascended to the role of prophet and priest and also judge. Israel has been ruled in its tribes and its regions by judges. These judges would basically be tapped on the shoulder by God himself, and they would be kind of heroes in a perilous time in Israel's history. So they weren't even voted on members of some kind of governing body. They were just kind of appointed by God. They'd serve and lead for a time, and then they'd pass on to someone else that would do it as well. It's last chapter, in chapter 8, it's where we learn that Samuel has kind of assumed this role of judge. He's actually appointed his sons, which had been the tradition. The judges' kids would become the next in line to be judges. And so he had a couple sons, Joel and Abijah, and he had sent them to be judges in a place called Beersheba down in the southern part of Israel from where Samuel was living. And these guys were not good at their jobs. They are unlike any other politicians that have ever lived. They took bribes. They could be bought for justice and all these things. I'm so grateful that no other politicians have succumbed to these temptations. If you're picking up my sarcasm, I hope. But that's just what happens. Power corrupts, and so these guys have been corrupted. And so in verse 3 last week, or verse 5 of chapter 8, the elders had come, and they had said to Samuel, hey man, time for a change. They said it this way, behold, you are old. Ouch, wow, hey. But it's true, he was an older man. He wasn't long for this earth. And the way things worked is that once he left, his sons would take over. And Israel was like, we're not having it. We're not having these bozos in charge. So you're old, your sons don't walk in your ways. So now, Israel says, appoint for us a king to judge us like all nations. Now this was a part of God's grand plan years before when the children of Israel had been emancipated from Egypt and were kind of hanging out in the wilderness for 40 years before they got to pass over the Jordan into the promised land. God had said in Deuteronomy 17, hey, you can have a king. In fact, I'll give you a king. Implying when I'm ready to give you your king, you'll have him. Anybody been a parent? Mom, can I have a cookie? Sure, I'll give you a cookie sometime when I'm ready to give you a cookie. Mom, can I have it? Yeah, when I'm ready. Any parent ever use that one? Yeah, we'll go when I say we'll go. Power up, right? We might do that, in our sin nature in ways to domineer and dominate, but God is in dominion. He's over all things, and he's the say-so. And so he said to Israel, yeah, you'll have a king when I say so. But here Israel was coming to its current leader, Samuel, and saying, we want a king now. Reminds me of those commercials. I want my money, and I want it now. Has anybody seen those commercials? It's like, what? That's what Israel does in this situation. And so Samuel gets all kind of fussed out. In our reading last week, he goes to God, and he says, can you believe these guys? And God's like, yeah, I can totally believe it. In fact, Samuel, don't take it personal. It's nothing about you. They're just defying me, like they always have. Read our Bibles. The people of God were especially gifted at rebelling against God. We just get there. I don't know what that is about us. I trust that's not, or that we're all in here growing away from that. But that's our natural disposition in sin. Not God, me. And so God's like, yeah, same stuff, different day. They're defying me as their king, so I'll give them a king. But here's what I want you to do, Sam. I want you to make sure that they read the small print. They read the fine print on what they're going to get when they get a king. And if you read those verses with us last week, you know that Samuel gets all of these elders together, and he says 6 different times, this guy is going to take from you. 6 different times. He's going to take your sons. He's going to take your daughters. He's going to take your servants. He's going to take your crops. He's going to take your herds. He finishes, and he says he's going to make you, this king of yours is going to make you his slaves. That's the fine print. And so Israel, upon hearing, that this is not going to be, a we win, we get experience, but we lose experience. They say, well, we don't want a king, right? Is that what they said? Oh, thanks for letting us know, Sam. Whoa, dodged a bullet there. We'll just wait for God and his will to unfold, and we'll take the king that he gives us. Is that what they said? Some of you are like, I wasn't here, Mark. What did they say? No, that's not what they said. Samuel gets done reading the fine print, and they're like, perfect. We'll take it. We'll have a king just like all the other nations. It'll be awesome. He'll lead us into battle. We'll never lose again, even though every time they went into battle and God wasn't their king, they lost every time. Aren't we funny, us humans? We convince ourselves of all kinds of just cockamamie craziness. And so what unfolds now, starting here in chapter 9, is the story of the first king, a guy named Saul. We're going to watch over the next 3 chapters as he kind of emerges from anonymity in a tribe called Benjamin, and then meets Samuel, and God brings them together and anoints this guy, Saul, to be king. Want to hear about him? Here it comes. Starting in chapter 9, verse 1. It says, there was a man of Benjamin whose name was Kish, the man of Benjamin. Benjamin is this really itty-bitty tribe. It's just the smallest, area-wise of any of the tribes of Israel. It is also, according to the book of Judges, one of the most wicked tribes of Israel. Like some really horrible stuff went down in Benjamin. So I find it very interesting that God, when he gets set to give these Israelites their king, says, I'm going to go to the worst tribe and the smallest tribe, and I'm going to give you one of those guys for your king. Later, this guy Saul, spoiler alert, is going to be deposed. God's going to remove him as king and put David from the line of Judah, from the tribe of Judah, in his place. And that's a whole great story. Come back, we'll talk about it. But it's from David's line that our Savior, Jesus, our King, emanates from. And so God starts with a bogus tribe, a bogus king. He says, here you go, told you so, and off they go. He's the son, this guy Saul, of a guy named Kish. All I want is your extra time and your Kish. All right, 4 times we get, that was for the people who like that. All right, 4 different generations mentioned here. This is the same thing that happened in the telling of Samuel's story in chapter 1. God's going to do a lot in paralleling Saul and Samuel through the whole story. And so he starts in the same way that he did with Sam, 4 generations. Their names are Abiel, Zeror, Bechorath, and Aphiah. And this guy Kish, who was the father of Saul, is a Benjamite, and he's a man of wealth. He lives on Davis Island. He's got a couple Teslas and, other expensive vehicles. I don't know if those are even expensive. I don't have one. Anyway, but he's got money. He's not just rich. Verse 2 tells us he's good looking. It says that he had a son named Saul, a handsome young man. The Bible isn't like, profuse with its descriptors like this. It doesn't say that guys look good or look bad a lot, all right? We get twice in the story of the kings of Israel, handsome men. First one, Saul, and David is also referred to as a handsome and ruddy young man. But Saul's a looker. In fact, the writer goes on, there was not a man among the people of Israel more handsome than this guy. Brad Pitt, eat your heart out, right? And then not just that, not just is he a good-looking guy, like the best-looking guy in all of Israel, all the girls want to be with him, all the guys wanted to be him, right? Because he wasn't just good-looking, he was a bad man. He played center on the Israeli national team. It says from his shoulders upward, he was taller than any of the other people in Israel. Wherever he walked, people saw him. He stuck out, like chest high above everybody else. Best looking guy, tallest guy. Everybody in Israel, when they met him in a few chapters and found out that he was going to be the king, they were like, oh, God in heaven, thank you, you did it. You found the perfect guy. Look at this guy. I mean, he's the toughest guy in Israel. He's the best looking guy in Israel. Because man looks at the outside and makes all of its decisions based on what they see on the exterior. But hold your judgment for a second here. Saul's got nothing going on up here. He's certainly got nothing going on in here. What follows is the story of how Saul and Samuel meet. It's a long 8 verse, 25 verse story that I'm not even going to be able to tell the whole thing. I'm going to give you the last 10 verses in like 3 sentences. Eventually, Saul and Sam meet, okay? Saul doesn't recognize him, walks up to Samuel. This is verse 18. Hey, have you seen the prophet Samuel? He asks Samuel. And Samuel's like, yeah, you got him, bro. How's it going? And then he says, hey, way to go. You found me. Your donkeys, we're going to meet them in a second. Your donkeys that you've been looking for, they've made it back home. Don't worry about that anymore. I've got something more important for you to kind of noodle on. God has given you Israel. How blessed are you? In essence, in so many words, God is making you king. Saul, it might surprise you, is not excited about the idea. You'd think the best looking and tallest guy in Israel would be like, of course he's making me king. Look at me. But he's like, oh, that's not a good idea. I'm from the least clan, from the least tribe. He's got all these reasons. And so what happens next is kind of hard to kind of discern and decipher in reading the scripture. It tells the story of how Saul is sent to this big dinner party by Samuel to sit at the head of the table. He's given the choicest cut of the meat, the leg, and he gets to eat it in front of all these people who are already admiring him because Samuel has kind of tapped him and made him special. That night, he sleeps on the roof of the house he's staying in. It was like the best, most air-conditioned spot in the house. It's like luxurious, accommodations. And then he wakes up, and Saul says, take your servant and meet me outside. And then in next week's chapter, we're going to see Saul and Samuel talk about becoming king more. I think Saul was being given a peek behind the curtain of being king. It's like, it's not going to be all bad, Saul. You're going to sit at the head of many tables. You're going to eat the finest foods and live in the finest spots. It'll be okay. But that's the last 10 verses. You're welcome. What precedes that is the journey from where Saul lives in Benjamin to where Samuel is in Ephraim. And it starts with donkeys. You ready? Now the donkeys of Kish, again, rich guy, lots of animals. So does anybody know what a herd of donkeys is called? It's not a herd. It's a drove. Anybody seen or said that before? They come in droves. I've never known what I was saying. Did you know what you were saying? You're probably smarter than me. That's what it is. It means a herd. They come in big groups. A drove is a herd of donkeys. So this drove or herd of donkeys that belonged to Kish, Saul's father, went missing. They were lost. And so Kish goes to his son Saul, and he says, take one of the young men, one of our servants with you, and arise and go look for the donkeys. Now, that's all it says. It doesn't say how the donkeys got missing, right? It just says Saul and the servant were supposed to go get them. Here's my suspicion. Here's what I sense. In my house, if you break it, if you lose it, it's on you to fix and find. Are you with me? Like if so-and-so, one of my kids left the door open and the dog got out, we're all going to end up going looking for it, but it's on you that the dog got out. Go get the dog, right? Who's with me? So I don't know if this is what happened with Saul, but my sense is that Saul left the barn door open, the donkeys got out, and so Saul's dad, like a good dad, says it was on you that they got out, and so you take one of these servants to go find them. And it should have been probably this quick find. But apparently Saul's got lousy donkey GPS. He cannot find the donkeys. And therein, in this fruitless search, he's going to end up at the feet of Samuel and become king of Israel. What started out as a donkey search ends in the palace. Are you with me? And this is why we're going to talk about this theological thing today called divine providence. Are you familiar with divine providence? God's providence, it's kind of in the word itself. Providence is at its root provide. It's God's provision for his people. One of the verses that I love from the New Testament that talks specifically about providence is verse 6 in Philippians chapter 1, where Paul says, I am sure of this," as he speaks to the church in Philippi, "that he, God, who began a good work in you, will bring it to completion at the day of Jesus Christ." Who's heard that one? Anybody heard that one? Yeah, it's a familiar one for us. But what is it speaking of? Providence. God, our sovereign, started a work in you here in Philippi. You became Christians at his behest and because of his grace through Christ. He is working through you now, and he will complete his work all the way until you see Jesus or until he comes back. That's my confidence, Paul says. I believe in the providence, the provision, the plan of God. It's happening around us all the time, and I believe that even if you don't want to be a part of it sometimes, because he's got special experience in this. Paul, before he was Paul, he was Saul. Anybody remember that? And he understands just how God can kind of redirect things as his providence is being unveiled. If you don't know it, read the Bible. It's there. But that's what we're talking about today in the story of Samuel and Saul. Divine providence happens when we step into the plans that God has made for us. It happens anyway, but it happens best when we step into the plans that God has made for us. When we go with his flow as he appoints and as he provides. It's passenger seat living. Jesus, take the wheel. I'll go where you lead. I'll act as you command. I'll listen for you and follow. Not just be a hearer, but be a doer of the things that you say. Anybody ever been a participant in a surprise party? Who's ever been to a surprise party? Who's ever been surprised at a surprise party? Aren't those fun? If you were the surprise-ee and not the surpriser, you had, hopefully, no idea what was going on until you got to the final point where people started jumping and launching out from behind couches and yelling and screaming, and then it all sank in. Oh, I see what's been going on here. I thought you had to get this from the house, blah, 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 and I thought it was weird, but here we are. Thank you so much. Happy birthday to me, right? That was kind of an earthly sample or an earthly sense of what we all live in. Even if you don't believe in God, you are living in his script for things. His will is moving forward. You and I are players in it. Either, happily, willingly, or he works despite us.
Here's what I found.
Thank you, Siri. He works despite us and leads us through what for us is a surprise, but for him is something he's been planning all along. Are you with me? Divine providence, as quoted here from gotquestions.org, one of my favorite websites. If you're asking yourself some big questions about God and the things that he's about, this is a great website. You can just plug your question into a search bar there on gotquestions.org, and it'll spit out stuff like this. I wrote in providence, divine providence. It says, divine providence is the governance of God by which he, with wisdom and love, cares for and directs all things in the universe. That means the universe as a whole. He created it, sustains it. His providence is over it. The physical world that we live in, the affairs of nations, every human destiny, whether it's a destiny of success or failure, the protection of his people. This doctrine stands in direct opposition of the idea that the universe is governed by chance. We don't believe that, okay? Now, it gets complicated because why would God allow this? I get it. There's big questions. But don't ever rob God of his sovereignty and his providence. If he isn't sovereign, he isn't God. And so we don't believe in chance. We don't believe in, that was lucky. There's no such thing as luck. If you're holding on to rabbit's foot, talismans, or, the idea that you're cursed because something happened and now you've got bad luck, break all the mirrors in your house. No such thing as bad luck. Are you with me? Some of you are like, break all the mirrors? Why would I do that? It's an old wives' tale. What is it, 7 years bad luck? I don't know. We don't believe in luck. We don't believe in coincidence. As we're going to see, God is ordering steps. He is always at work around us, right? And he invites us to join him at parts in his story where he can move his plans, his script forward. So, with what remains in the few verses that I'm going to preach from 1 Samuel 9, I want us to answer this question. How is God's providence revealed in life? Where can we see it? Let's read and we'll find out. So Saul's looking for some donkeys. He's got his buddy, a little servant with him. It says that he passes through, verse 4, the hill country of Ephraim. So he leaves the territory of Benjamin. I'm not going to do a lot with the map today. But he heads east towards Ephraim. And that's like, some scholars think like 15 or 20 miles. I mean, he's walking, people. This is like days that he's looking for donkeys, all right? Doesn't find them that way. So what's it say he does? He leaves Ephraim, he passes through the land of Shalishah. Doesn't find them there. He goes through the land of Shalim, but they're not there either. He's really lousy at finding donkeys. So then they passed back through the land of Benjamin. Maybe they doubled back. Let's go see. And they're still not there. I got to pause real quick. I don't know if you're picking up on the metaphor that God's playing here with Saul and the donkeys. Saul's a bad shepherd. I think he's the one who let the donkeys out of the barn. He's apparently unaware of where donkeys will go because he can't find them for days. Bad shepherd. Would it surprise you to know that all of the decent leaders, not good or perfect, but the decent leaders of Israel have always been good shepherds? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the patriarchs of the fathers of Israel, all good shepherds. Moses, right? What's he doing when the bush catches fire? He's watching the flocks of his father-in-law in the land of Midian. He's a good shepherd, all right? But then we get to the story of Saul, and I love that God does this. Bad shepherd. Can't find his donkeys. And I love that in this story, Israel isn't sheep, it's donkeys. I don't want to have to connect the dots for you, but Israel are the jackasses in this story. Are you with me? They're the stubborn, unwilling ones. They don't follow. They're lost. Don't miss all of the sweet little bits that God gives us in his will unfolding. So Saul can't find these donkeys. And in verse 5, they come to a land after looking all this time called Zuph. Now, I don't expect you to have the whole book memorized, but does anybody remember who was born in Zuph in 1 Samuel? Samuel. Who got Samuel? I tried really hard to just lay that up for you. Yeah, this is where Sam's from. 1 Samuel starts with this child is born to his parents, Elkanah and Hannah, in the land of Zuph. He's a Zuphite. And so that's where Saul ends up looking for his camels. What a coincidence, his donkeys. What a coincidence that he's in the region where Sam was born. How weird. They get there, still can't find the donkeys, and so he turns to his servant and he says to him, "Come, let us go back, lest my father cease to care about the donkeys and become anxious about us." He says, "We've looked too long, we can't find them. We'll go to Costco, they've got a donkey section, we'll get some more." No big deal. They're just donkeys. I don't want my dad feeling, fearful for us. Let's just be done with this. And what comes next is the first instance of God injecting himself into the story. Even more so than having the donkeys get lost and having Saul walk around. In his providence, what happens next is God uses an unlikely person to point the way forward in his plan for Saul's life. I don't know if you can appreciate relationships between servants and masters in the time of Saul's life. Servants were to be seen and not heard. They weren't necessarily respected in their opinions. I guess, after nights of sleeping on the open range looking for donkeys, these guys might have formed a different kind of bond to where this guy, unnamed, anonymous, speaks up in the story. And he says this in verse 6. The servant says to him, "Behold, there's a man of God in this city, and he is a man who is held in honor. All that he says comes true. So now let us go there. Perhaps he could tell us the way that we should go." He's an encourager. Hey, we're not done. And listen, we're already here. We've wandered all the way to the land of Zuph. Everybody knows about Samuel except Saul. But he's like, everybody knows that this is his hometown. He's our high priest. He's our prophet. He's the judge of all of Israel. Everybody knows about Sam. Maybe he's in town. I know he moves around a bunch. He's kind of working everywhere, but But maybe, just maybe he's in town. We're right here. It doesn't hurt to go check. Let's just go find out. Because if we find Samuel, he is gifted by God and be able to see things. He could pray for us in our search for the donkeys, and the GPS might work then. I wish I knew this guy's name. He's like so many other in the Bible who just don't get names. They're just nobodies. They're not mentioned, and they're just put into the story. Back in chapter 2, an unnamed prophet comes to Eli. And he says to Eli, hey, God's going to move you out so that he can move something better in. God sends the same message to Samuel when he's 10 years old. The two of them, the unnamed prophet and Samuel, basically prophesy what we read about in chapters 3 and 4. But this unnamed guy, it just happens so many times. And it's just so we're clear, it happens in our lives too. Like we're someone who's just kind of a no one. Maybe that's someone for you. You still don't know their name. But they said something to you, did something, that affected you, that led you on the path that you're now on. That wasn't a coincidence. That wasn't lucky. That was the will of God being played out in your life through an agent that you may not even know the name of, so that you can move forward in what he has for you. I get these at my house now. My father-in-law moved in back in May, and we get the large print edition of the Reader's Digest at my house. These are awesome. And you can read these from the space shuttle. That's how big the print is. Anybody get this growing up? My family always got the Reader's Digest. It fits perfectly. They designed it to fit perfectly on the back of your toilet. That's how they designed it. And I would read these things, and they're basically, Reader's Digests are basically articles, some, but mostly contributions from the people who read it. And they'll just send in stories. I've been doing it for I don't know how long, but I know it was around in 1949 because I was reading this week. I read of a story from Reader's Digest in 1949. The author of the book I was reading was like, this can't be true. And so he actually fact-checked this thing, and he found out it was absolutely true. And it's the story of a guy named, I'm going to make sure I get it right, Marcel Sternberger. Know him? No. In 1949, Marcel Sternberger, a Hungarian immigrant to the United States after the war, is going to visit one of his friends who's in the hospital. He's fairly new to New York City. He's always gone to work on the same train in the morning and come home on the same train at night. But to get to this guy's hospital, he's got to go to a different stop, a different platform, and get on a different train. So he's a little nervous. And as the train approaches, he sees that it's pretty full. The doors open on the subway. He tries to get in, but it's just packed. But right here, as the doors are getting ready to close, have you ever been on a subway that's like, the doors are getting ready to close. And this guy looks at his watch, and he all of a sudden remembers that he's not supposed to be, where he is. He's supposed to get out at this stop. And he ducks out of the train, and Sternberger sits down in his chair. As he sits down, he looks to his left, and next to him is a man reading a Hungarian newspaper. He's from the homeland. And so Sternberger, one Hungarian, greets the other in his native tongue, and of course, they just launch into a conversation. Now, Sternberger's sitting next to a man whose last name is Faskin. And as they talk, they have time to actually get into their stories of how they got to the United States. Faskin is a particularly sad story. When Hungary was overrun by, I think, the Germans first, and then the Russians actually fought them back. At some point in the war, Faskin was forced to work for the Russian army in cleaning up the dead Germans' bodies. So he was around death for 2 or 3 years as the war came to its close. After the war ended, he was freed from his post, and he heads back to his town, Debrecen, Hungary. When he gets there, it's in ruins. His family, all gone. He goes to his home. His wife, not there. He goes to a neighbor who still is, and he says the Germans came. They took her and many with her to Auschwitz. We presume that she is dead. And so that's what precipitated Faskin deciding to move to the United States. He heads to Paris. He catches the next plane that he can get and settles in New York. So Sternberger's sitting next to Faskin listening to this whole story. And the longer it goes, the greater the tingle is as he's listening. Because just the week before, he had been at a party with fellow Hungarian immigrants, and he had met a girl, a woman. And this woman had a fascinatingly similar story to what Faskin was telling him. She had been, basically a victim of the war. Her family had actually been taken to Auschwitz. She was at Auschwitz, and as one of the only ones to escape, she had been taken to a munitions factory to work there as the rest of her family went to the chambers. She comes back to her town, and she looks for her relatives, all gone. She looks for her husband, not there. And then she heads to America. And so it's all kind of lining up. And Sternberger says to Faskin, "Is your name Bella?" And Faskin is like, "That's creepy." "Yes, it is." He says, "Is your wife's name Marla?" And Faskin leapt from his seat. "How did you know that?" Just then the train came to a stop. The doors opened. They ran as fast as they could to a telephone because Sternberger had taken this woman's, Marla's, phone number. And they got on the phone, and Sternberger said, "Hi, Marla, I don't mean to freak you out. What street did you live on in your town?" And she said the name, and when he said it out loud, Faskin, Bella, grabbed the phone from his new friend and said, "Marla, Marla, Marla, Marla," and talked for the first time to his wife in 4 years. They reunited, kind of gave you the rest of the story in the article. Marla marveled at how God would allow this to happen, right? And people read Reader's Digest and are like, "Wow, that was lucky." Sternberger got on that train. I mean, he didn't even have a seat, and he just kind of snuck in. And he didn't sit anywhere. He sat next to Faskin, and they were reading the Hungarian newspaper. How crazy is that? Weird. No. This is a God who loves who he has created. He doesn't do it every time. So you're like, I'm hoping that something like that. He doesn't do it every, but when he does, it's by his hand, through the strangers that he sends, that his grace is poured out on us. So, unnamed servant says, "Saul, let's go." And of course, Saul's like, "Absolutely, great idea." No, he's not. It's not going to be that easy, right? Verse 7, here's what Saul says. "If we go, what can we bring this guy? We've been out on the road all this time. We've spent all our money. I got nothing. There's no bread in our sacks. No present to bring to this man of God. Why would we even go? We don't have anything to give." It was a custom in those days in the Canaanite pagan religions, and even with some, I'm sure back in the days when Eli and his sons were in charge, people would, even Samuel's kids, they would pay for, some kind of blessing that the men of God would give. I've thought that's a great idea. We should start doing. I don't think that at all. No, it's a horrible idea. It's terrible. It's stupid. And you'll be glad to know Samuel never takes anything from Saul, as a bribe or anything like that. But Saul, that's how he's thinking. We got to be able to bribe these guys, or else they're not going to do for us what we asked them to do. The servant doesn't argue with that. He just says, "Yeah, I get it, and I have what we need." That brings us to the second thing that God does in his providence. God often doesn't just send strangers, perfect strangers, to kind of move the ball forward in his story with us, but he'll provide us what we need to keep moving. Does it over and over and over again in your life and mine. You may not notice it. You might think, "Wow, that's lucky. I didn't know how that was going to work out, but it did." Get used to saying this: "Yay, God." Everybody say it with me. Yay, God. When you see something happen in life that's good, that you weren't expecting, just skip right over all the other stuff that people say, "That was lucky, what a coincidence," and go straight to, say it with me, "Yay, God. Look what you did, God. Look how you provided." Now, we don't have the story of what we're going to read about next. It says that the servant says to Saul, "Here, I have with me a quarter of a shekel of silver, and I will give it to the man of God to tell us our way." What a guy. First of all, encourages his boss, "Let's keep going. Maybe we can find the donkeys if we talk to Sam." Secondly, when his boss balks, he says, no problem. I got some money. Now listen, servants didn't have money. They weren't walking around with a bunch of, big fat bank accounts. They had whatever their masters gave them and a place to sleep. Are you with me? I don't know how this guy got the money. It's called a quarter of a shekel. Don't think like our quarters for dollars. They would carry around these big, it was a unit of weight, these big silver coins. A quarter of a shekel was probably around 3 grams of silver. And so if you and I were going to pay for something, me and TJ went to lunch and it cost a half shekel, I would have 1 shekel and I'd say, all right, it's a half shekel. And someone would grab a hammer and a chisel and basically chop my coin in half so that a half shekel, the weight that was required, could be paid. And so I don't know where this guy got this quarter of a shekel. Maybe he had a half shekel when he left and he bought some gum at the gas station as they were going around. But he has a quarter of a shekel and he's like, this will be perfect for such a time as this. Didn't know why I was bringing this, but hey. And that he's willing, listen, don't miss this. He's willing to give this for the sake of the donkeys. They're not even his donkeys. They're his master's donkeys. And so God is prompting this servant who has no reason to encourage his master. Let's keep going. Who has no reason to bankroll his master. I got what you need. But God uses this guy to move his plan forward in Saul's life. Over and over in our Bibles, we see this happen, where God brings just what's necessary. My favorite from the New Testament is the feeding of the 5,000, right? Everybody knows that story. Or if you don't, I shouldn't assume that. Well, let me tell you a great story. Jesus is teaching one day. 8 hours goes by. No one's had anything, at least officially or formally to eat while he's been teaching. And it gets to the end of the day, and he's looking out at this hungry crowd of people, 5,000 men and their children, their wives and children. And so we're talking probably 10, maybe even 15,000, 20,000 people. I mean, it's a massive crowd. It's like, a lightning game. And he looks out at this massive crowd, and he says to his 12 friends, feed them. Hey, they look hungry. Go ahead and feed them. And his friends look at him like, are you crazy? There's no way we could feed this many people. Like even if all the subways were still open, right? There's just no way. And so he says, no, go, listen, it'll be fine. Go ask everybody out there to give us what they got. And it's not in our Bibles, but this is where I think everybody started hiding their Yeti coolers. Are you with me? Because people were coming out that day and they're like, awesome, Jesus is going to teach. I should probably pack something. And so they got their food and they've probably been munching up. But maybe they've got some left. And it's not in our Bibles, but I think that a lot of people had food and they just didn't offer it. None of us would ever do that. But in this particular case, people are like, no, Jesus can't have my stuff. And then there's Jimmy. Still young. Does everybody pick up on how it's usually the youngsters who are the heroes in these stories? Everybody remembers that Jesus says that unless you become like one of these, you can't enter my kingdom. He's like, you sophisticated adults, you're just all hardened and selfish. Give me an innocent kid any day, because I can work with them. And so Jimmy's like, yeah, Mom packed me 2 fish and 5 crescent rolls, Pillsbury. And I was saving them, for when we were done, but if Jesus needs them, cool. And they walk him up there and he hands them to Jesus. Here you go. Thanks for a great day. Here you go. And Jesus pats him on the head. And if you don't know the story, a miracle happens. A miracle where God's Son made a lot through a little. And the faithfulness of this kid, this face in this massive crowd who just said, you can have it, is how God moved the story forward. I'm telling it in 2023 in Brandon, Florida. It's a big deal that God in his providence would take the provider in these stories and do much through them. Follow me quickly through these next verses. It says that Saul says to his servant, hey man, sounds great, let's go. And so they head off to the city to find Samuel with the quarter shekel and hopefully get some help on the donkeys. It says they went up the hill to the city, and they met some young women coming out to draw water. Water was usually drawn in the morning before it got too hot, and then the evening when the sun went down. And so we're probably nearing the dinner meal as they head up to this town. There's a well outside of town. The girls are there, and they see Samuel, and they're like, woo-hoo-hoo, because he's beautiful. And so they're not, it may break protocol that they shouldn't talk to strange men, but this guy's super tall and super hot. So here we go. And they say to these girls, is the seer here? And the girls answer, crazy. It's in the Hebrew, crazy. He is. Like, he hasn't been here all week. He literally just got here. Look what it says. He is, behold, he's just ahead of you. Hurry. He has just now come to the city. Like today. Crazy. He just got here. Because the people have a sacrifice today on the high place. As soon as you enter the city, you will find him before he goes up to the high place to eat, because he's going to be there, because the people won't eat until he comes, since he must bless the sacrifice after those who are invited will be invited to eat. But you should go now. They're insisting. Now go up, for you will meet him immediately. And once he goes, he's involved in that big party, and you're not going to see him again. Go. So weird that you want to talk to Sam, and he just got here today. Now what comes next is a flashback scene. We're going to go back a day. It's like Wayne's World. He's going to go back to what was going on in Samuel's life the day before Saul got there. In verse 15, it says this. It says, now the day before Saul came, the Lord revealed something to Samuel. And we're going to get our third thing about providence. And we'll stop here after this one. Let me finish. God directs our steps if we listen while we pray. One of the dwarfs who were like, whistle while you work. Dun-dun-dun-dun-dun-dun. You may remember that? I was thinking of that when I wrote this blank. It's like, listen while you pray. Dun-dun-dun-dun. Maybe you want to sing that one. Every time you start a prayer, listen. Because that's what prayer is. Everybody gets that prayer is a conversation, right? It's not just me with my grocery list. God, do this, do this, do this. Give this, give this, give this. It's a conversation. God's real. He's listening right now. As I prayed earlier, he's guiding, I trust, as I speak. He sees your thoughts. He's looking at them right now. He knows what's going on inside your head. And he speaks to us through his Spirit. Leads us, guides us, prompts us. Sometimes it's the obvious things. I should do this and not that. And we're like, yes, Lord, okay. But then sometimes he tells us to do stuff and it's like, really? Like he told Noah to build a boat in the desert. Really? He told Abraham to pick up all of his flocks and tents and walk from Iraq to Israel. Really? I mean, he tells us to do things sometimes, and he does it to test our faith and to see if we really are submitted to him. But if we're paying attention, God's talking. He's telling us things that he hopes for us, ways that he wants to include us in his will unfolding, his providence becoming. So Samuel's talking to God, and God says to Samuel, tomorrow, verse 16, about this time I'll send to you a man from the land of Benjamin, and you shall anoint him. And then I got to talk about this for just a second. To be prince, and then the three my's. Over my people Israel, he shall save my people from the hand of the Philistines, for I have seen my people because their cry has come to me. The way the writer of 1 Samuel pens this is very specific. God, when he refers to Saul, does not call him king. The Hebrew word for king is melech. Everybody say melech. He calls him prince, nahib. Now, God, to my knowledge, never refers to Saul as the king. Even when he introduces the idea to Samuel, who is not in on this yet, he says, I'm bringing a guy from Benjamin, and he'll be the prince. Now, when I hear prince, I think there's a father who is king. And in this case, that father is God the Father, who is the king. He even refers in the possessive to my people 3 times. And he says, their cry has come to me. They're my people. I'm their king. But I'll give them this human substitute because that's what they've asked for. I'm not the best at listening to God and doing what he says. I think that's why James makes such a big fuss out of being hearers and doers of God's word. Don't just be hearers of God's word. Do it. Follow in faith. Regardless of your questions about how this is going to work out, even if things for your whole lifetime don't work out. Like God might ask you to do something and you're like, I don't know what that was for. And you may go to your grave and stand before him and be like, still don't know what that was for. And it may be just not revealed to you that you were supposed to do this for this reason. But God's called us to a submission to him. That just says, yes, Lord. No, what's the question? Yes, Lord. No, what do you need? I sent my wife, I didn't send her. She sent me away with our youth group this last story. When I was a youth pastor, our youth group took off for a weekend somewhere, and I was leading it. And I went to the bank, and I pray this isn't the case in your life, but we didn't have a lot of money, and I took our last $50 out of the checking account and took that with me as cash. Young husband, young father, didn't do the math, just took it all, thought I might need it, blah, blah, blah. Was certain that my wife could get whatever she needed through our credit card, but this is 20-something years ago when credit cards weren't always accepted at gas stations or at grocery. Some of you are like, what? First of all, you had cash? What is that? And secondly, there were places that didn't take cards. You couldn't tap? Oh, I love tapping. And so Eleanor had this credit card that was absolutely no use to her, and I had all the money. And so began a weekend of my wife feeding our kids from whatever she could find in our house. Went through the pantry and the fridge, cleaned it all out, shoved peanut butter and crackers into our kids' faces for meal after meal after meal until Sunday morning when we were done with the food in our house. She was going to have the embarrassing, hey, Mark took all the money. Can I borrow $20 until he gets back so I can get our kids some groceries conversation at church that morning. Yeah. But she prayed, and she said, God, if you could just provide this, please do that for us, and went to church. She was loading our kids back into their car seats. They were 3, 2, and 1. Back into their car seats. Yeah, and I left. Anyway, but she's loading them back in, and hadn't thought about her prayer from earlier in the morning when all of a sudden there's a man standing behind her. It's our friend Dave. He and his wife Kristen were just like aunts and uncles to our kids and close to us still. And Dave had walked across this hot parking lot on a Texas Sunday morning, and he was holding, I was corrected last service, $7 in his hand. And the story I remember is that Dave had discovered the bonus bucks. Has anybody ever looked in the pockets of your jeans and been like, oh, I totally forgot I had that there? And he had shoved $7 into these pants, and he was like, I'm $7 richer, yes. And so he's walking with his family to his car, and God stops him at his door and says, take that money to Eleanor right now. And Dave had all these, he's like, she's all the way across the parking lot. It's $7. And he just couldn't shake it. And God said, so he's a good Christian. He shuts the door and he walks across and he says these words to Eleanor. I have no idea. Has anyone ever done this? I have no idea what I'm doing right now. This is the craziest, whatever. Here, God told me to give you $7. I found it in the pocket of my jeans. Here you go. And Eleanor took the $7. And just so you know, the lunch meal at Wendy's at the drive-thru for 3 packs of chicken nuggets, 1 large fry, and 1 large Coke at that time was like $6.94. She had this thing mapped out. She knew exactly when he said $7. There was no mystery to my wife. She said, thank you, Lord. Went to Wendy's and yelled at me when I got home. And these are the stories that fill the diaries of our family. They're the stories that I still tell you 20-something years later. Why? Because they're the stories of how God in his providence brought things about. And so now, you and me, this week, may we be ready to listen to the strangers that God's going to use to move the story forward. May we be ready, expectant even, of the ways that God's going to provide for us so that the story continues. May we be listening when we pray to ways that God might speak to us so that we can be a part of someone else's story moving forward. It's his providence. He invites us to join him in it, and it's our privilege to do so. Is anybody grateful that our God bothers with us? Doesn't just bother with us, but he loves us so much that he pursues us, chases us. Let's sing about that as we close.